I was at a party and dropped my watch. Another guy stepped on it and then started harassing a lady there. I interrupted him and scolded him, saying, "You can't do that on my watch." Here's an old hymn based, among other scriptures, on Matthew 26:41. "Watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak." I invite you to sing along with us.
Rise, my soul, to watch and pray. From your sleep awaken. Be not by the evil day unawares o'ertaken. For the foe, well we know, is a harvest reaping, while the saints are sleeping. Watch against the devil's snares, lest asleep he find you. For indeed no pains he spares, to deceive and blind you. Satan's prey oft are they, who secure are sleeping, and no watch are keeping. Watch, let not the wicked world with its lies defeat you, lest with bold deceptions hurled it betray and cheat you. Watch and see, lest there be faithless friends to charm you, who will seek to harm you. Watch against yourself, my soul, lest with grace you trifle. Let not self thy thoughts control, nor God's mercy stifle. Pride and sin lurk within, all your hopes to shatter. Heed not when they flatter, but while watching also pray to the Lord unceasing. God protects you day by day, strength and faith increasing, so that still mind and will shall unite to serve Him and forever love Him.
Too bad that hymn was written so late. King Belshazzar might have been saved if he had heeded its warning. Here's what Daniel 5, verses 2 through 4 said about him. While Belshazzar was drinking his wine, he gave orders to bring in the gold and silver goblets that Nebuchadnezzar, his father, had taken from the temple in Jerusalem, so that the king and his nobles and his wives and his concubines might drink from them. So they brought in the gold goblets that had been taken from the temple of God in Jerusalem, and the king and his nobles, his wives, and his concubines drank from them. As they drank the wine, they praised the gods of gold and silver, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone. That is when a hand appeared and wrote a message on the wall. Darren and I wanted to see that, so he took me for a ride in his DeLorean so we could watch. Here's a short video of that adventure. Wow, would you look at that? Daniel had to be brought in to interpret the message. Here's what he said in Daniel 5:25 through 28. This is the inscription that was written: Mene, Mene, Tekel, Parsin. Here is what these words mean. Mene, God has numbered the days of your reign and brought it to an end. Tekel, you have been weighed on the scales and found wanting. Perez, your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. that very night King Belshazzar was slain. Here's a good example that not everything in the Bible is in chronological order. This story of the writing on the wall is in chapter 5 and describes the last night of Belshazzar's reign. The first verse of chapter 7 says that Daniel's vision described in that chapter occurred in the first year of Belshazzar's reign, or 553 BC. Here's the way I think all this played out. By the way, keep in mind that chapter and verse numbers were not used in any of the original writing of any of the books of the Bible. They were added around 1200 AD and later. What we think of now as chapters 1 through 4 all occurred during Nebuchadnezzar's reign from 605 to 562 BC. Daniel probably wrote them down as they occurred. I think he intended to share what he had written with others later. In 553 BC, he had the vision of the four beasts. The last verse, Daniel 7:28, says, "This is the end of the matter. I, Daniel, was deeply troubled by my thoughts, and my face turned pale, but I kept the matter to myself." I believe that since he did not intend to share this experience with others, he wrote it down on a scroll separate from the one he already started with the tales of their court experiences. The vision he recorded in chapter 8 occurred 3 years later, and once again, I believe he did not wish to share it with anyone else, so he wrote on the same scroll he used for chapter 7. In 539 BC, he was called on to read the handwriting on the wall for King Belshazzar. Shortly after King Cyrus took over, Daniel was thrown in the lion's den. I believe Daniel wanted to share these two experiences, so he added them to the scroll with what we think of as chapters 1 through 4, and they became chapters 5 and 6. Then he started having more visions, which he added to his scroll of visions. At the end of the last vision, Daniel is told to seal up what he wrote until the last days. I believe that was when he sewed the scroll of his visions onto the end of the scroll of the court tales, rolled it all up, sealed it with a wax or clay seal, and wrote instructions on the outside of the scroll about when the scroll could be opened. I suspect he used a phrase that appeared a couple of times in his visions. He may have written something like, "Do not open until the daily sacrifice is abolished and the abomination of desolation is set up." Those events occurred in 167 BC when Antiochus Epiphanes stopped Jewish sacrifices and set up an altar to Zeus in the temple. That would explain why the book of Daniel was unknown to anyone before then. In chapter 7, Daniel has a dream. Here's how the dream begins in Daniel 7 verses 2 through 4. Daniel said, "In my vision at night I looked, and there before me were the four winds of heaven churning up the great sea. 4 great beasts, each of them different from the others, came up out of the sea. The first was like a lion, and it had the wings of an eagle. I watched until its wings were torn off, and it was lifted from the ground so it stood on 2 feet like a human being, and the mind of a human was given to it." Later, he's told that the 4 beasts are 4 kingdoms, so it starts out looking like it will parallel King Nebuchadnezzar's dream about the statue. The Great Sea in verse 2 is probably the sea of humanity out of which these 4 kings rise. The first beast is a lion, which represents Nebuchadnezzar, similar to his being the head of gold on the statue. In chapter 4, we are told that he lost his mind and lived like a beast for several years, a possible meaning of his having his wings torn off. The return of his sanity would be shown in being made to stand like a human and being given a mind like a human. Verse 5 says, "And there before me was a second beast, which looked like a bear. It was raised up on one of its sides, and it had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. It was told, 'Get up and eat your fill of flesh.' This beast could be compared to the chest and arms of silver on the statue, and would represent the Medo-Persian Empire. In verse 6, we meet the third beast. After that I looked, and there before me was another beast, one that looked like a leopard, and on its back it had 4 wings like those of a bird. This beast had 4 heads, and it was given authority to rule. This would represent Alexander the Great and the Greek Empire. It could be compared to the belly and thighs of bronze on the statue. The 4 heads would represent the end of his empire. Since he died with no heir, his 4 generals divided his empire among themselves. The 4th beast is introduced in verse 7. After that, in my vision, at night, I looked, and there before me was a 4th beast, terrifying and frightening and very powerful. It had large iron teeth. It crushed and devoured its victims and trampled underfoot whatever was left. It was different from all the former beasts, and it had 10 horns. This beast sounds very much like the 4th kingdom from the vision of the statue, the iron legs and iron and clay mixed in the feet. That would be the Roman Empire. It makes sense until you get to the part about the 10 horns. That is beginning to sound like the end times kingdom that has not yet appeared. Perhaps, for the purposes of this vision, the influence of the Roman Empire has not ended yet. The Western Roman Empire, with its capital in Rome, died in 476 AD. And the Eastern Roman or Byzantine Empire, with its capital in Constantinople, ended in 1453 AD. Much can be said for its influence continuing today. 20 to 30 languages in use today are based on Latin. Those are called Romance languages. Even though English language has Germanic roots and origin, 50 to 60% of our words come from Latin. End times prophecies do seem to predict a worldwide empire that will seem very much like the Roman Empire in its brutality. Verse 8 speaks of another player in this drama. While I was thinking about the horns, there before me was another horn, a little one, which came up among them, and 3 of the first horns were uprooted before it. This horn had eyes like the eyes of a human being, and a mouth that spoke boastfully. It sounds like the 10 horns are 10 future kingdoms rising out of the influence of the old Roman Empire, and probably forming some kind of alliance, until another shows up and conquers 3 of them on his rise to power. I believe this will be the event that marks the beginning of the worldwide empire to come. Daniel 7, 9 through 10. As I looked, thrones were set in place, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was as white as snow. The hair of his head was white like wool. His throne was flaming with fire, and its wheels were all ablaze. A river of fire was flowing, coming out from before him. Thousands upon thousands attended him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court was seated, and the books were opened. His vision moves into the final judgment. Verses 11 and 12 give us the verdict. Then I continued to watch because of the boastful words the horn was speaking. I kept looking until the beast was slain and its body destroyed and thrown into the blazing fire. The other beasts had been stripped of their authority, but were allowed to live for a period of time. Here we are told that the 4th kingdom will end, and that it had been ruled by Satan all along. His ultimate fate is also confirmed. It also tells us that the other 3 beasts may still exist, but without the authority they used to have. The ruins of Babylon are in Iraq. The remnants of the Persian Empire would be Iran, and Greece still exists as a small nation. That may seem ho-hum now, but Daniel was given this vision about 2,500 years ago. Verses 13 and 14 tell us about the ultimate kingdom. In my vision at night I looked, and there before me was one like a son of man, coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days and was led into his presence. He was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All nations and peoples of every language worshipped him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed. In verses 15 through 28, Daniel asks for and is given an explanation of what all this means. I have summarized this as we went through the details of his vision described in verses 1 through 14, so I won't go through it all again, but I do recommend reading it for yourself. It is probably time for me to reiterate a disclaimer I have previously used. Darren is not a real person, nor does he represent a real person. We do not have access to a DeLorean nor any other time travel device. The photos and videos shown as representing historical events were AI generated and or computer manipulated. I included them to help us imagine what the actual events may have looked like.